to our conversation today with Steve Mosher, our president and resident expert on things Chinese and beyond. Again, welcome, because I know people are just coming on. I can see on the screen that we're on 3 platforms now, so welcome. Steve, you've been active for a long time inspecting and investigating the Chinese activities, not only abroad, but in the United States. And today, there is a lot going on in the United States that has to do with our dear friends in China. Yet the major media has said nothing about the thousands of, for instance, just a couple of days ago, the Australian news service revealed that it had a list of over 2 million Chinese Communist Party members throughout the world. And that list is now public. I've gotten a copy, and I find that there are members of the Communist Party in the United States, and they are working for major corporations, government agencies. Steve, what are we to make of all this?
Well, of course, it's hard to know where to start in telling this story, because it's been going on for such a long time. There has been Chinese espionage in the United States on a significant scale, really, since we normalized diplomatic relations with China back in January of 1979. As soon as they opened up an embassy in Washington, D.C., and consulates in places like Houston and San Francisco and New York, we really shouldn't call them embassies and consulates, because they're spy hubs. Look, when the U.S. goes overseas and opens an embassy and a consulate in Shanghai and in Beijing, we hire locals for secretarial jobs. Those locals, by the way, are members of the Chinese Communist Party who are inside our embassy and consulates to spy on us. China doesn't do that. China brings over a complete staff of thousands for its diplomatic establishments in the United States. And they're all Communist Party members. And literally, they're all spies, in the sense that they're all tasked with gathering information about American military activities, about governmental activities, about the practices and technologies of private companies. And they're also engaged in making connections with government officials at all levels of government. That's why we had Mike Pompeo not long ago say about the Chinese that they were much more active. The Chinese Communist Party is much more active in the United States than any of the other bad actors in the world by a factor of 10. Mm-hmm. They're much more active than the Russians and the Iranians, obviously. They're really everywhere. They're very, very, very active. So I went through and I compiled a short list of some of the officials in the United States that have had contact with Chinese consuls general and the Chinese ambassador himself. It's an amazing list. I mean, you have things like, here's the superintendent of a school district in Barrington, Illinois, with the local Chicago consul general. Here's a picture of the chairman of Chester County in Pennsylvania with the local Chinese consul general. They're meeting with county level officials. Allegheny County in Pennsylvania had been in the news a lot lately because I think there was massive voter fraud in Allegheny County. Here's a picture of the local county executive meeting with the local consul Chinese general, Huang Ping. And it just goes on and on. Governors, for example, mayors, and the mayor of New Orleans, the governors of Maryland, Secretary of State, meeting with Chinese Ambassador Cui. Secretaries of State are the guys who control the elections. I mean, and then of course we have the most famous example of that, and the one I think that's most troubling in this particular circumstance is we have the governor of the state of Georgia going last July to meet with the consul general of the Houston consulate. And 2 weeks later, Governor Kemp signs an agreement with Dominion Voting Systems for $109 million to install Dominion voting systems throughout the state of Georgia. Now, I don't believe in coincidences. He's in the Houston consulate 2 weeks before he signs this very, very large contract with Dominion Voting Systems, which, by the way, has a $400 million investment from a Chinese-controlled company. So connect the dots, Chris. Connect the dots, people who are listening. There's a direct connection between some of the voter fraud,
Mhm.
the voter fraud in Dominion Voting Systems that we've been seeing, and the Chinese Communist Party. And one final point about Chinese spying. Back in 1998, we had something called the Cox Commission, led by Chris Cox, to look into Chinese spying surrounding the 1996 election of former President Bill Clinton. There had been a lot of money pumped by the Chinese military into Bill Clinton's campaign in one way or another. There was a lot of spying at that time. And I met with Congressman Cox and read his Cox report. And at the time, this is 22 years ago, 2 decades plus, at the time there were 8,000 front groups, Communist Party front groups in the United States, masquerading as friendship associations, masquerading as Chinese student associations, masquerading as companies, all working for the Chinese Communist Party. Now, how many do you think there are today? 80,000? A multiple of that? I think it has grown enormously in the last few years,
Mhm.
and the tentacles, the claws of the dragon, the claws of the red dragon of China, are really everywhere in the United States. We have to wake up to this threat now, because if we continue sleepwalking through it, that'll be the end of our experiment in liberty here in the United States.
Well, you mentioned, Steve, meetings, and I understand from a recent report in a pretty liberal outfit, Axios, about a Chinese woman who had an interesting sort of meeting. Her name is Fang Fang. Am I saying that correctly? She meets people in familiar but different ways. Now, I read that Fang, was a bundler for Eric Swalwell. Now, there are 3 terms that I'd like you to unload for us. We got a woman named Fang Fang, a bundler, whatever that is for our listeners, and who is Eric Swalwell?
Well, I was on Laura Ingram's show last week and again today to talk about Eric Swalwell. People will remember Eric Swalwell for several reasons. One is he's a congressman from California. The second reason is that he's on the Intelligence Committee in the U.S. Congress, a very small, closely held committee entrusted with all of the intelligence information gathered by the U.S. government's 17 intelligence agencies. Highly sensitive position. And thirdly, he had a long-standing relationship with the infamous Chinese Mata Hari, whose Chinese name is Fang Fang. It's F-A-N-G, so we would probably pronounce it Fang Fang. And Fang is her surname, but Fang is also her given name. And her given name means, fittingly, given her occupation, fragrant. So she was Fragrant Fang, and she came over to the United States in her late 20s and enrolled in the University of California, East Bay, and as a student. Now, you might think that would be suspect on the face of it. Most of the undergraduate students who come to the United States come here at 18 and 19 because that's the normal age where you finish high school and go on to college. So she came 10 years later, and she was an agent of the Chinese Communist Party. She was working for the Ministry of State Security in Beijing. That's the premier civilian spy agency in the Chinese Communist Party's controlled government in China. It spies on the Chinese citizens at home, and it spies on people abroad as well. So she was sent over here to spy, and her cover was as a student at this American university. She was immediately elected president of the Chinese Student Association on campus.
Wow.
And the Chinese Student Association, of course, works for the Chinese Communist Party. So when you have a Chinese Student Association, and we have hundreds on American campuses across the country. They are extensions of the Chinese Communist Party's United Front work, which is to say, work in penetrating and suborning and influence operations within China, American society at large. So she was the head of the Chinese Student Association. She was a very wealthy student, by the way. She drove a white Mercedes, and
Wow.
she has I think a Tiffany watch worth $29,000. People have estimated. So she comes from money in China, but this is typical, Chris, because the Chinese Communist Party, 92 million members strong, are really the only people in China who can get passports, which are strictly controlled by the Chinese Communist Party and issued to only reliable people. And they're the only people who, once have the passport, can get exit visas to actually leave the country, because it's a two-step process. So anyone we run into in the United States, the chances are, 9 out of 10, that they're going to be Communist Party members. So she was a spy, and she was sent to win friends and influence people. And she was very, very, very active. She was active with mayors. She was active with city councilmen. There are a number of pictures of her with American political figures, including one in a nightgown in a local mayor in California's, obviously in his house, and they're all cozy. So Swalwell apparently was not the first, and certainly was not the last of her many, many conquests. But she found him when he was a city councilman and getting ready to run for higher office, getting ready to run for a congressional seat. And so she did bundling. Now, I don't want people to understand what bundling is. In American colonial times, bundling meant that you put the guy in a sack and he could spend the night together with your daughter, because he was tied up in a sack and his hands and so forth were incapacitated. Bundling in this case, however, means that you collect money from your friends and give it in a bundle to the candidate that you're supporting. Now I don't know exactly how much money she bundled for Eric Swalwell, but it must have been a significant amount, because after all, she's wearing an almost $30,000 watch and driving a white Mercedes around as a freshman at a California State University. And so I suspect that this money was dark money. I suspect that this money came in one fashion or another from the Chinese Communist Party. And she was successful in two respects. The first respect was that Eric Swalwell was elected to Congress. And the second was that she developed a close personal relationship with him. Now, he has refused, we should point out, to comment on whether or not he was actually having an affair with Fragrant Fang. And, Eric Swalwell is married. He has several small children. So I don't want to speculate too much in that regard. But the fact is, his only response to the question, were you having an affair with Fragrant Fang, was to say, I can't comment on that because it's a matter of national security. Now, you can make of that what you will. I had to repress a laugh when I heard about that, because he is now on the Intelligence Committee, but I can't imagine that whether or not he was having an affair with a Chinese spy is a matter of national security, except for him. And the fact is that he is still on the Intelligence Committee, and he is still in the U.S. Congress. Both of which facts amaze me, because how can he continue to be allowed to serve on the Intelligence Committee when it has now become known that he had a relationship with a Chinese agent, with a Chinese spy? And here's how the relationship ended. The relationship ended after Eric Swalwell was appointed to the Intelligence Committee by Nancy Pelosi in the House of Representatives. And the FBI, after he joined the Intelligence Committee, the FBI came to visit and told Eric, You know, the woman that you're seeing, the woman you're close to, the woman who's been helping you campaign, the woman who placed at least one intern in your office, which is another lapse. That woman is a Chinese spy. A couple of things happened at that point. First of all, Fragrant Fang disappeared quickly. So the FBI did not have a chance to interview her, did not have a chance to arrest her. She's obviously not here as a diplomat. She could have been arrested for spying, but somebody tipped her off and she fled back to China and has not been heard from since. And Nancy Pelosi was told by the FBI of Eric Swalwell's indiscretions. The Democrat members of the Intelligence Committee were told about, at the time, by the FBI about Eric Swalwell's indiscretions. The Republican members of the Intelligence Committee, however, were not told. And they only found out a couple of weeks ago when this story broke in the news. So there you have not only a problem on the part of a single Democrat congressman, you have the Speaker of the House allowing someone to stay on the Intelligence Committee who's obviously a security risk, has proven to be a security risk. You have the Democrat caucus in the House allowing one of their members to stay in Congress, even though he's been a major security risk. And you have the FBI not only failing in their duty to stop the spying, but warning one political party while keeping another political party in the dark. I think it just shows, it illustrates the bias in the Federal Bureau of Investigation that I think we've seen full blown over the last few years. So that's the story of Eric Swalwell. But I think that story, Chris, could be repeated with governors and congressmen and other people across the country, because Fragrant Fang was by no means the only, what the Chinese call honeypot, sent to the United States to seduce American politicians. The honeypot strategy is famous in Chinese history. This is how you win battles. You send an attractive young woman into the enemy camp who seduces the general, learns his plans, and then spirits those plans back to your side, and you attack at dawn in a fashion that the enemy is not expecting. This is famous in Chinese novels, for example. The honeypot strategy, one of the famous 36 stratagems that the Chinese Communist Party even today uses to weaken and destroy its enemies. And remember this, when we talk about this kind of subversion going on, this is classic strategy on the part of the Chinese Communist Party, which wants to avoid open conflict with the United States because we still have the preeminent military on the planet. But it is trying in every possible way, using all of the applicable 36 stratagems, to weaken and defeat its primary enemy, the United States of America. And so we have many Fragrant Fangs running around. We have many agents offering bribes directly and indirectly to American politicians. We have sweetheart deals offered to the family members of American politicians, and other ways to transfer wealth from the Chinese Communist Party to people in the United States who are willing to sell out their country in order to pad their bank account.
Well, there's a flip side to that, if you will, to bribes. My dad used to tell his law students, starting 96 years ago, that if you take the first bribe, you may as well take the rest. But there's a flip side, and that's called blackmail. Because here's a story about the executive branch under Obama. Now, we have an Office of Personnel Management in the United States government that handles all of the files of people who have worked or are working for the United States government, tens of millions. And in 2015, well, actually, that's when it was revealed. In 2013, Obama's Office of Personnel Management, was hacked by Chinese communist intelligence agents, and 22 million personnel files, including mine, were stolen and handed over to the Chinese Communist Party and its intelligence agencies. Now, those files include the FBI records of renewals of senior high-end classified clearances. And I had the highest myself. And so they would go ask everybody that I had listed in my past about me, and those are called raw files. Those raw files are made out of notes, and the notes are stored. Many of them are useless. Many of them are not applicable, but you might find an old neighbor or acquaintance who had something bad to say. It stays in the file forever. So we got 22 million Americans or American employees abroad who are working for American embassies abroad and who are drawing an American salary. And the Chinese Communist Party has all of these files on all of them. Now, what can China do with that kind of information? And do you think they're still doing it?
Oh, I think they're certainly still doing it. I think the goal of the Chinese Communist Party is to collect information on everybody of significance, everybody of influence, everybody with any wealth, and everybody who runs a company of any size in their big data systems. And they use artificial intelligence to sort through the information and pick out people who might be susceptible to blackmail, to bribery, to covert influence of one kind or another. And it's not just we know that they have such lists because more recently, it was exposed that one Chinese company had the names of several million people of influence from Africa and Europe. So this is a massive data collection effort. It is data collection for a purpose. They would like to, I think, at the end of the day, have files on everybody on the planet. And they're moving in that direction. We just had John Ratcliffe, for example, who is the director of national intelligence and therefore has information from all of our 17 intelligence agencies, the CIA, the NSA, and so forth, warned just a few days ago in an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal that Beijing was attempting to dominate the world. Now, I was happy to hear him say that because I've been saying that for the last 30 years. I was happy to hear Mike Pompeo say that a few months ago because it's been clear to those of us who've been paying attention that China indeed does have a plan to dominate the globe. Ratcliffe highlighted how Chinese spies pose a much bigger threat than any other country because of not only because of the scale of the effort the Chinese Communist Party is making, but because of its scope. Chinese spies use sex, they use drugs, they use money as bait. They not only carry out military and commercial espionage, they also compromise US lawmakers. We talked about Eric Swalwell. Blackmail, bribery, covert influence to target members of Congress. And once you accept the sweetheart deal, as, of course, the Bidens did, then basically the Chinese Communist Party owns you because it can use that information to blackmail you. If you don't do what they want you to do in policy terms, they can release the details of the sweetheart deal that they gave you. They can let the public know how much money has changed hands and into what accounts it went. It might also have other information on, for example, Hunter Biden's activities on his trips to China. Some of that was on his laptop, and some of that has been revealed through a Taiwan network. And I don't recommend that anybody watch it because it's awful stuff. But this is the kind of stuff they have not just on Hunter Biden, but on anyone who falls into their honey trap or any of the other traps that they set up with the express purpose of catching you. And I use the term catch deliberately because this is elite capture. They're targeting elites in the United States, and they're using any means possible. The Chinese phrase translates as by hook or by crook. They use any means possible to get their hooks into you. Any weakness that you have, which these personnel records that you released, that were stolen by China, would make clear. Any weakness, they will take immediate advantage of. So this is, John Le Carré, the great writer of spy fiction, right, who just passed away a couple days ago. And what the Chinese are doing every day comes right out of the pages of spy novels. But it's not just one Red Sparrow from Moscow. It's not just one fragrant fang getting her fangs into one congressman. This is a massive effort to infiltrate and win influence and fundamentally destabilize the American political system. And where we are today, quite frankly, is that one party in the United States is compromised, clearly, from the top down. The other party is partly compromised, is what we might say it's wobbly, to quote Margaret Thatcher. So the penetration has gone on for a long time. It's very, very deep. And if we don't deal with it in the next very short window of time, I think that we will be in big trouble in this country.
Well, look at the way things stand as of this morning. Swalwell is still on the Intelligence Committee. Hunter Biden's not in jail. And yesterday we have this wannabe president, we can't yet call him president-elect, Joe Biden, a baptized Catholic. He gave a petulant speech yesterday, whining about democracy, unity, and he even used the Bible to pat himself on the back. He promised to, quote, rebuild this house of ours upon a rock that can never be washed away, close quote. At which the United States Catholic bishops jumped up and cheered this morning on their PR website. Now, bishops aside, is Biden talking about the Great Reset, that solid rock that can never be washed away? It certainly would be pretty permanent if it ever came to pass. What about his Delaware basement? Is that what he's talking about? And what's all this stuff about a rock? Did you happen to run across those comments and his unfortunately negative and petulant mode?
Yeah, I don't know how you can at one and the same time claim to be fostering unity when your party is actually, members of your party, senior members of your party are actually working behind the scenes with Antifa and other radical groups that, of course, until recently, and perhaps again soon, were rioting in the streets of America's major cities. There seems to me to be a contradiction there. I also think that that these occasional biblical references, the fact that when Joe Biden went to Kenosha, Wisconsin, and gave a little speech in a church before, I think, 6 carefully socially distanced people in the church. It wasn't announced in advance, so they only had a few followers there to listen to him. I think that all of those things are simply staged to try and convince Americans that he really is in favor of unity. He really does want to be the president for all the people. And he leads a party, however, that's deeply compromised, not only by the Chinese Communist Party, but is deeply divided. A party that has abandoned the middle class and now survives by huge donations from the extremely wealthy who've gotten much more wealthy over the last year because of the China virus pandemic. $1 trillion in wealth has gone into the pockets of people like Jeff Bezos and Mark Zuckerberg and others. And of course, a party that's supported by the very wealthy and the very poor, which he continues to claim to be representing.
Mm-hmm.
And the other party, of course, is now a party of the middle class, of small business, which is being crushed by the China virus. No accident there. The party of family, and the party clearly of life, which is, my primary concern, is the protection, the defense, advocacy for innocent unborn life. And I'm afraid that however many times that Joe Biden quotes the Bible, holds up the Bible, or mixes metaphors from the Bible, he will usher in an administration that is by far the most pro-abortion administration that we've ever seen in this country. And so we will go from the most pro-life administration that we've ever had in this country, which is to say the Trump administration, to the most pro-abortion administration we have ever seen in this country. The longstanding Helms Amendment, which prevents U.S. tax dollars, your tax dollars and mine, the tax dollars of people listening in, from going to pay for abortions, is now going to be done away with. By whom? By the party of Joe Biden. The Mexico City policy, which prevents U.S. tax dollars from promoting and performing and lobbying for the legalization of abortion overseas, that will go by the wayside as well. We will be going into African homes and homes in Asia and saying to the people there, you have too many children, you need to legalize abortion, you need to let us sterilize you, we will help to pay for your abortion. We will find that babies will be killed after birth for the sin of having some small birth defect, or perhaps no birth defect at all, on the whim of the parents and the doctor in question. We've already seen that expressed clearly by Governor Northam in Virginia, who has, I think, allowed babies that were not wanted after they were born to die from lack of care. So this is a very stark contrast. This is really black and white. Mm-hmm. And we must do all we can to stand in the way of this.
Well, now the next few days are going to be very interesting. You mentioned Mr. Ratliff. He has a report that's due by Friday, as I understand, that will report on foreign interference pursuant to a 2018 executive order designed to address such interference if it ever came to pass. Then we've got January 3rd, when the new Congress and the newly elected senators are sworn in. And then January 6th, when the vice president tallies the votes, and the rest is unknown. What is your read on these on these developments?
Well, there's a lot going on. Obviously, we're finding out more every day about the way that the votes were miscounted, deliberately miscounted, misadjudicated, I think is the word that we should use, by Dominion voting systems. We have the information now out of the very first analysis of an actual Dominion voting machine, because those Dominion voting machines, Chris, have been kept under lock and key since November 3rd. The secretaries of state in places like Wisconsin, Michigan, have kept everybody from looking at them and from making forensic copies of the data on those machines to see exactly what happened on the day of and the days after the election. So now we've looked at the 22 voting machines from one county in Michigan. And what did we find? Well, we found that over 2/3 of the ballots that were fed into those machines were recorded as errors. Well, what happens when the machine records an error? It sends the ballot for something called adjudication. Okay? So in this one county alone, 68% of the ballots supposedly could not be read by the Dominion voting system machine, which then sent it to be adjudicated. Thousands and thousands of ballots were sent away from the machine electronically to a remote location in Michigan, probably Detroit, Michigan, where there were a lot of shenanigans going on, for a poll worker in Detroit, Michigan to adjudicate. Now, what do you think the adjudication consisted of? Well, we know from other data that in some cases, the adjudication consisted of what's called batch adjudication, where 200 or 300 or 400 votes would come in to the poll worker's machine at this remote location, and the machine would, those ballots would probably mostly say they were for Trump, and the poll worker would say, oh, that couldn't be what the voter meant. I'm going to move those votes from Trump to Biden. And he takes that batch of votes and moves it into the Biden folder, and magically, because it's all done electronically, the only thing you're doing is inconveniencing a few electrons. Thousands of ballots are then counted for Biden from votes that were originally cast by people for Trump. Now, think about cheating at adjudication is as easy as moving a file from one folder to another. So, and then they found on these machines that the adjudication files had been deleted. All right, so you're a voter in Antrim County, Michigan. You're a voter in any one of the 67 counties in Michigan. You're a voter in Nevada or in Maricopa County, Arizona, or in Georgia who's using Dominion voting machines. And you go in and you fill out your ballot and you put it in the machine. And guess what? It's sent to an adjudicator who changes your intentions on the ballot. I think this fraud has probably occurred everywhere. I think it's massive. I think one hint that there's a pattern here comes from Nevada. 68.5% of the ballots in this one county in Michigan had to be adjudicated, but in Nevada, 70% of the ballots fed into these Dominion voting machines also went to be adjudicated. So it looks like they were sending over 2/3 of the ballots to be adjudicated, and we know what happens then. So I'm ready to say that Dominion voting systems, we should change the name. We should call it Dominion cheating systems, because I think there was fraud.
Steve, I've lost your signal. Folks, it seems that we've lost Steve's signal. We're going to get him back on as soon as we can. We have been discussing